Hello, this is Father Matthew Schneider. Welcome back to the Autistic Priest YouTube channel. I've changed a few things up here. I haven't done a video for a while. I moved a few months ago, and with that I have a new location. I don't have the video camera, which I was using to record anymore. I'm recording this on my phone. I'm using kind of a little lavalier microphone designed for phones. I also got a new shirt here if you want. It says Autistic Christian. It's pretty much the same as one Autistic Catholic, but with the Jesus face and Christian on the bottom. And today I want to explain to you a little bit about what autistics want others to know about them when they come to Mass, or I think when they come to any religious service. It would apply to Protestant services as well. This is also going to be a post on my blog. I'm just going to include this video with the post, and I'm going to do the video because I think some of the video I'll have a few little reactions, a few little comments on some of these things, whereas the blog is more just collecting what I got from 15, 20 different people into a single post so that people can know about it. All the names here are anonymous or pseudonyms, and really what it is trying to help others understand things from our perspective. Because autism is kind of like being a foreign language in the sense that our structure is different. I don't know if you ever tried to speak Spanish, but in Spanish they have two verbs for to be, and English speakers have a lot of trouble distinguishing ser and estar. Anybody who's studied Spanish probably knows that, but that's a fairly standard difficulty we run into. And I think the same way with autism, and I just want to go through these. I divided them into three different categories, which are really just, four, sorry. Autistics at Mass, autistics in prayer. Autistics are all different, and the challenges associated with autism. And I have my paper here, which has the exact quotes. I want to quote the people directly. I don't want to kind of paraphrase what others are saying, because I think it's important to give the other autistics their rightful voice that they responded to me with. So this was based off some posts I made on Facebook and Twitter. Even though they're public, I still want to keep the pseudonyms, keep some anonymity to these people who were very open a lot of times. So we process things differently. We don't want to be alarmed. And here's what a few people said about Mass. Actually, this is mainly parents, but it also taught one autistic at the end. The first one is a mother, Samantha. She said, autistics are paying attention at Mass. They are listening and are reverent, even if they are moving or stimming. My son says he is really taking the prayers, the Mass, worship seriously, even if you see him moving around. And I think that is an important thing, that sometimes we'll be stimming, sometimes we'll be a little bit moving, but we'll still be paying attention. I know it drives other people crazy that when I read a book, if I'm doing it for study, I will pace. And other people are like, how do you do that? I'm like, it's way easier than if I'm just sitting still. And I think that that's a vestibular stim, but which is a little different. And I don't do that in the middle of Mass, although I do kind of go foot to foot sometimes, and people notice that, like, why are you swaying in the middle of the Eucharistic prayer? Well, that's called vestibular stimming. Vestibular stimming is different from like hand stimming, is that the vestibular system is like your balance system and things like that, and your internal. That's a lot of times why some autistics really like rocking chairs or things where you move back and forth like that, and that's what those are for. Likewise, Shirley said, autistics are not undisciplined blasts. Patience and charity, not judgment from others, would help autistics in parishes. Dirty looks and nasty notes are not okay. Autistics do not ruin Mass. I think that's pretty straightforward. Then we go to Stella. Let my children be at Mass and partake in her own. Let my child be at Mass and partake in her own way without disapproving glares. My daughter has recently started shouting, "It's Jesus there!" during the consecration. If she could process how to whisper, she would. And this is a very beautiful thing when a little kid does that even. And sometimes you have to realize that an autistic might do this at an older age than other kids. I think it is, I think most people think it's cute when my nephew, who is like 2, did that. And he said it rather loudly, but I can understand how people might not take it the same way from an elementary school kid. So then Sean talks about dress, and he says that I tried to get my son to wear something dressier than sweatpants and a t-shirt to Mass, but it's either he wears that and he behaves, or he behaves like 1,000 ants crawling all over him during Mass, which is not something helpful. So yeah, sometimes autistics just have a very strong sense that we need to be comfortable in our clothes. And as is probably, you've probably read from autistic forums, like comfort in clothes is often a very big deal for autistics. Name tags and things like that. Like even when I got these shirts made, I checked with several different companies who did custom printed shirts like this to see if any of them did them tagless, because if they did, I would have definitely got those for autistics. I know that the tags on here are probably a discouragement from getting them. I mean, you can remove them, sure, but it would have been better without them. But none of the companies that do it custom printing, online, print on demand, like I would need, did it without tags, unfortunately. I did check. Finally, we have Sandra, who's an autistic herself, and she says, I use squishy toys to keep my body calm. Another way to do this is keeping the things, self-regulation is a fancy word for it, but it's relevant because I'm trying to do well. And I think that's important sometimes, that others think that autistics are just, distracting or things, but oftentimes we might take something out like this and be what other people call fidgeting with it, which we call stimming. And it's actually so that we can focus, not so we are distracted. It's actually so that we can focus because we need a certain balance of our sensory input, and we can't balance it as much as others can on our own. So now we talk about autistic prayer. I don't know if it just buzzed there. I just got a notification on my phone. I can see as I'm recording this. So autistics can pray too, and our prayer might be a little different. In fact, I'm working on a project to try and quantify or kind of explain autistic prayer, but that's not done yet. So we have first Jane, and she says, please don't dismiss our spirituality and mystical experiences just because we're autistic. A lot of times when I talk about my spiritual experiences, they're dismissed as me just being mentally unstable because I'm autistic. And those type of experiences are not necessarily mental instability, because we have lots of saints who had a lot of very strong mentality, who had those kind of spiritual mystical experiences. And autistics are not necessarily unstable psychologically. We do have a higher risk of that, and that is true. And if things are starting to sound like voices and schizophrenia type thing, then definitely go and get that checked out, because I don't know what the odds are, but it's slightly higher, I think, for us. And then for the general population. But if it is somehow relatable to what you read in the books on prayer, the Masses of Prayer, I wouldn't dismiss it. I mean, I've had deep spiritual experiences that I'm not quite going to share on here because this is a public video. Then we have James. James says, we want to be Christ's disciples too, fully involved in the mission of God and fully a part of the worship that is the church. We are called just as much as everyone else. So it wasn't just prayer, but it's also doing the work of the church, volunteering, helping out. And I think that there's another thing here with somebody said it, that they want to volunteer in a more behind the scenes way, like the accountant for the parish festival or something. So we'll get that later on. Next, we have Jessica. Autistics have the same right as neurotypicals, people with common neurological conditions. For those who are coming to this video not super familiar with autistic language, to receive the sacraments, to attend Mass, to be accepted despite our differences. Then John said, a very practical thing for Mass would be the neurotypical who realizes that not everyone wishes to engage in conversation, especially during the Passion of Peace. I find it the most difficult time, especially if someone is kneeling in prayer, just leave them be. Now, first of all, the sign of peace is not supposed to be a time of conversation. It's peace be with you, and that's it. It's not a peace be with you, how you doing, what's up, are you going to brunch after Mass? Talk about that after Mass. And it's great to go to brunch after Mass, nothing against that, but talk about that after Mass. Don't use the sign of peace to make lunch plans. It's meant just to be that quick sign of peace, and it isn't mandatory. In fact, a lot of parishes now that we're in the COVID-19 pandemic have said either not to do it or to do some kind of non-touching manner, like a bow or the peace sign or something to that effect, which is fine. The church doesn't mandate a specific sign of peace. The shaking of the hand is the standard one here in North America, but it is not necessarily universally, and it's not a required sign. So we have two more here. As a parent of a 22-year-old with autism, the predictability, the universality of Mass is a comfort to him. The repetition and ritual are a balm at the end, or end of or beginning of a chaotic week. And I think that that's important because priests are supposed to say the black, do the red, follow the rubrics of Mass. And if we do that, it does create a stability, a repetition, which is very helpful for us on the spectrum. So just a reminder to priests to really follow that and not to just every week change it up, because there are a lot of people who can be thrown off by that, both autistics, little children, elderly, etc. Finally, for this section on prayer, Joy says, we see, hear, and think everything differently from others. So we're going to perceive, say, the readings, the music, the homily, the prayers differently. And I think that's important in Mass, is that we understand them differently. We understand language much more practically. We go from the individual to the universal instead of going from the universal to the individual. Like when an autistic thinks of dog, they usually think of Rover and Fido and Katie and all the other dogs they've known. Maybe not all, but a bunch of dogs. Whereas when a neurotypical thinks of dog, they think of an abstract idea of a four-legged mammalian carnivore or omnivore, with a wet nose that hunts in packs as opposed to individually, as opposed to a cat or a bear, trying to make those distinctions. Now, there is that saying always that if you see one autistic, you see one autistic, and we've all probably said it or heard it before. And I think it's really important here, and this is what a few of the people brought up in what they wanted others to hear. They say, first we have Tamara, and yes, I just intentionally, when I did pseudonyms, I did each category, I did all the same first letter of the name. So we have all T's in this one, we had all J's, and then all S's in the first one, if you're following. So Tamara said, just because it is well documented that autistic people have those traits doesn't mean we all have them. I have an awkward time about people not looking in my eyes for the peace at church because they heard about that. I respect them for trying, but leaves us feeling off too. And I think this is true. I mean, I did a previous video on hyposensitivity in autistics, and I noted how a lot of times our sensory processing is different, but it's different in different ways for different autistics. Like for myself, I have a very kind of strict light sensitivity, in the sense that I'm hyposensitive and kind of hypersensitive too, in this, because if you go in my room, it's going to be the brightest office in the hallway, but then when I go outside, I'm the first one to put on sunglasses, because I think I have a smaller range, even though that range is higher than a lot of people like inside and lower than a lot of people like outside. It's a smaller range, and I think different autistics do it differently. Like some have no issue with looking people in the eyes, eye contact, things like that. Others have a huge difficulty. I mean, I have some difficulty. I often just think like, why? It's just kind of like, I do it because you're supposed to, but I don't really like get the value out of it. And sometimes when I might not, or I might look too deeply into somebody's eyes, and then people get a little spooked and things. So anyways, so then we have Teresa. We aren't afflicted by being autistic. Part of our neurology can be different, but being autistic is beautiful, and most of it is a perfectly valid, although different way of experiencing our faith. We don't need to act neurotypical to experience Jesus the right way. Jesus comes to us as we are. Jesus comes to us in an autistic way as autistics, just like he comes to us. He speaks English to English saints and Spanish to Spanish saints. So continuing, Tabitha says, don't insist on physical or eye contact. My daughter can do quick eye contact and a sign of peace at that time, but she will not shake hands. Physical touch is painful for her. My son is also autistic, but gives hugs and shakes hands. So that's showing that distinction. And one person wanted to note that there's probably more than you realize at the parish. I mean, as I'm moving into academia, I mean, there's only so many who are diagnosed who are in academia. But if you look at you're an autistic with an above average IQ, academia is kind of an ideal profession for an autistic, an ASPE, or however you want to say that. I'm not really going to get into that issue, but there's probably more autistics in academia than there are diagnosed autistics in academia. And it's also in your parish, and this person says, Thomas says, some of you are probably on the autism spectrum yourselves and you never suspected it. And no one around you is clued in enough to help you understand what's going on. And that's true. That's so true. Now, there's certain challenges that people deal with, and so people mention specific ones here. So I have about half a dozen here. So first, Kate. So it's K this time. the sensory issues associated with that make attending worship hard. So to realize that heroic effort sometimes an autistic might put in to make it even to Mass. Second, we have Catherine. We have to realize how hard it is for parents with nonverbal autistic children to go to church or to find spiritual direction for them and their little ones. It is difficult. I mean, I've offered it to a few people, but I've always learned, at least in other times in spiritual direction, I need to meet somebody face to face a few times. I can do like video conference spiritual direction, but I want to meet somebody face to face the first or second time, like once or twice first, to kind of get a more direct sense of them. But anyways, that's just me. So then we have Caitlin, who says, I want to be present every Mass. This can be so overwhelming though, because the people in the sensory overload, sometimes it gets so overwhelmed, I don't know what to do. Please be patient with us. Sometimes speaking to other parishioners is just more than I can handle. So somebody might just slip out of Mass. I mean, I noticed when I was diagnosed but not public about it, there was a parish I would often say Mass at, and there was one lady who would sit in like the front or first or second pew, who was fairly evidently on the spectrum, and I wanted to try and get her after Mass when I said the Mass she said, and she just like always just slipped right out like really fast after Mass because she probably reached her limit for sensory issues, and I don't want to push her in that sense. She might even know who she is. She might be watching this video for all I know. Anyway, so Kimberly then says that she wants others to know that it's sometimes hard for us to believe, that we want to find our place in the church and help, that we care deeply, that we don't always want to be the ones reaching out, but when we don't, it seems that nobody does. This is before Mass or after Mass, not during. When we do believe God, it is very deep and we want to share Him. And that's the sense that I've always had, that autistics tend to either be those who attempt to get to Mass once a week or more, or those who don't go to Mass, because the kind of going to Mass a few times a year, once a month, tends to be a very socially driven thing. Whereas if you really believe in God is real, then I'm going to go to Mass, try and go to Mass every week. Even if I have like some weeks I'm just, overwhelmed, have a meltdown an hour before Mass, I can't go, that's fine. Or I'm just not going to believe in God and be an atheist or agnostic of some form. And I think autistics tend to those two things, and much less in the middle, whereas if you look at the general population, like a huge percent, I think the majority are in the middle there. So that's a reality. And then Kristen, she says, we have our own faith journeys. We aren't just accessories to other people's faith, and we need as much companionship and accompaniment as anyone else on that road. And I think that's valuable, that each of us have our own faith journey. I have my own, you have your own. And just because we're autistic doesn't mean we don't have them, doesn't mean we're all the same. And we have to realize those challenges. Kyla says, many autistics are socially anxious. Don't try and force us into sharing groups or into volunteer roles that force us to interact with strangers. The sense of like the autistic being the accountant for the parish festival, or some kind of behind the scenes role that fits us better. And I think that's a valuable lesson. And Catherine goes straight to that. She says, there should be opportunities to volunteer behind the scenes. I do not need to be brought out of my shell. Don't suggest it. And yeah, that's true. Then finally, the final person here is Keith. And Keith says, don't presume malice, even if we do serious harm. Don't treat us like we are in a state of mortal sin when we wrong you. When we fail, it is because we lack skills rather than the desire to please or to displease. And I think sometimes that, I know I've been rude a few times unintentionally, where I was trying to be nice, but I just didn't realize the social cues or the emotional cues the person was giving. So I think that helps. And this is kind of a relatively unfiltered view of autistics. If you want to know more about autism, spirituality, etc., please subscribe to this channel. If you want to buy this shirt, please buy it. I got this one with the Christian on it for myself. I've had it in my store since I came out about a year ago, but I bought a separate shirt for this because I'm going to be doing a conference in May in the Cleveland area called Inclusion Fest Live, which I have a talk on including autistics in the church, but it's kind of an ecumenical presentation, so I figured it would be much better to come up with a shirt that said Autistic Christian rather than Autistic Catholic. I'll probably share details that sooner or later. I hope that still goes on at the end of April. I don't know now with all these closings due to COVID. a whole bunch of things are being closed all over the place, and that may fall by the wayside too at the end of April. So God bless you.